Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. Since it's Wednesday, let's continue with Letters of a Woman Homesteader. Chapter 16. At Gavitt's Camp, November 16th, 1912. My dear friend, at last I can write you as I want to. I am afraid you think I am going to wait until the brains are grown up before writing to my friends, but indeed I shall not. I fully intend to gather roses while I may. Since God has given me two blessings, children and friends, I shall enjoy them both as I go along. I must tell you why I have not written as I should have done. All summer long my eyes were so strained and painful that I had to let all reading and writing go, and I has suffered terribly with my back. But now I am able to be about again, do most of my own work, and my eyes are much better. So now I shall not treat you so badly again. If you could only know how kind every one is to me, you would know that even ill health has its compensations out here. Dear Mrs. Louderer, with her goose grease, her bread, and her delicious kuchens, Mrs. O'Shaughnessy, with her cheery ways, and her tireless friendship and willing, capable hands. Gavitt even, with his tidbits of games and fish. Dear little Cora Bell came often to see me, sometimes bringing me a little of Grandpa's latest cure, which I received on faith, for, of course, I could not really swallow any of it. Zebby's nephew, Parker Carter, came out, spent the summer with him, and they have now gone back to Yell County, leaving Gavitt in charge again. Gavitt has a most interesting and prosperous summer. He was commissioned by a wealthy Easterner to procure some fossils. I had had such a confined summer that Clyde took me out to Gavitt's camp as soon as I was able to sit up and be driven. We found him away over in the Bad Lands, camped in a fine little grove. He is a charming man to visit at any time, and we found him in a particularly happy mood. He had just begun to quarry a gigantic find. He had piles of specimens. He had packed and shipped some rare specimens of fossil plants, but his big find came later, and he was jubilant. To dig fossils successfully requires great care and knowledge, but it is a work in which Gavitt excels. He is a splendid cook, and I almost believe he could make a Johnny Reb like codfish, and that night we had a delicious supper, and all the time listened to a learned discourse about prehistoric things. I enjoyed the meal and I enjoyed the talk, but I could not sleep peacefully for being chased in my dreams by dinosaurs and ignodons, besides a great many horrible creatures whose names I have forgotten. Of course, when the ground begins to freeze and snow comes, fossil mining is done for until summer comes, so Gavitt tends the critters and traps this winter. I shall not get to go to the mountains this winter. The babies are too small, and there is always some happy and interesting thing happening, and I shall have two pleasures each time, my own enjoyment and getting to tell you of them. Chapter 17. The Homesteader's Marriage and a Little Funeral. December 2nd, 1912. Dear Mrs. Coney, every time I get a new letter from you, I get a new inspiration, and I am always glad to hear from you. I have often wished I might tell you all about my Clyde, but have not because of two things. One is I could not even begin telling you what a good man he is, and I didn't want you to think I could do nothing but brag. The other reason is the haste I married in. I am ashamed of that. I am afraid you will think me a Becky Sharp of a person, but although I married in haste, I have no cause to repent. That is very fortunate, because I have never had one bit of leisure to repent in. So I am lucky all round. The engagement was powerfully short, because both agreed that the trend of events and ranch work seemed to require that we be married first and do our sparking afterward. You see, we had to chink in the wedding between times, that is, between planting the oats and other work that must be done early or not at all. In Wyoming, ranchers can scarcely take time even to be married in the springtime. That having been settled, the license was sent for by mail, and as soon as it came, Mr. Stewart saddled Chub and went down to the house of Mr. Pearson, the justice of the peace, and a friend of long standing. I had never met any of the family, and naturally rather dreaded to have them come. But Mr. Stewart was firm in wanting to be married at home, so he told Mr. Pearson he wanted him and his family to come up the following Wednesday and serve papers on the Woman and I in the house. They were astonished, of course, but, being such good friends, they promised him all the assistance they could render. They are quite the dearest, most interesting family. I have since learned to love them as my own. Well, there was no time to make a wedding clothes, so I had to do up what I have. Isn't it odd how sometimes do what you can, work will keep getting in the way until you can't get anything done? That's how it was with me those few days before the wedding, so much so that when Wednesday dawned everything was topsy-turvy, and I had a very strong desire to run away. But I always did hate a piker, so I stood pat. Well, I had most of the dinner cooked, but it kept me hustling to get the house into anything like decent order before the old dog barked, and I knew my moment of liberties were limited. It was blowing a perfect hurricane and snowing like midwinter. I had bought a beautiful pair of shoes to wear on that day, but my vanity had squeezed my feet a little, so while I was so busy at work, I had kept on worn old pair, intending to put on the new ones later. But when the Pearsons drove up, all I thought about was getting them into the house where there was a fire, so I forgot all about the old shoes and the apron I wore. I had only been here 6 weeks then, and was a stranger. This is why I had no one to help me, and was so confused and hurried. As soon as the newcomers were warm, Mr. Stewart told me I had better come over by him and stand up. It was a large room, and I had to cross, and how I did it before all those strange eyes I never knew. All I can remember very distinctly is hearing Mr. Stewart saying, "I will," and myself chiming in that I would too. Happening to glance down, I saw that I had forgotten to take off my apron or my old shoes, but just then Mr. Pearson pronounced us man and wife, and as I had dinner to serve right away, I had no time to worry over my odd toilette. Anyway, the shoes were comfortable and the apron white, so I suppose it could have been worse, and I don't think it has ever made any difference with the Pearsons, for I number them all among my most esteemed friends. It is customary here for newlyweds to give a dance and supper at the hall, but as I was a stranger I preferred not to, and so it was a long time before I became acquainted with all my neighbors. I had not thought I should ever marry again. Jerrine was always such a dear little pal, and I wanted to just knock about footloose and free to see life as a gypsy sees it. I had planned to see the Cliff Dwellers' home, to live right there until I caught the spirit of the surroundings enough to live over their lives in imagination anyway. I had planned to see the old missions and to go to Alaska, to hunt in Canada, and I even dreamed of Honolulu. Life stretched out before me, one long happy jaunt. I aimed to see all the world I could, but to travel unknown by-paths to do it. But first I wanted to try homesteading. But for my having the grip, I should never have come to Wyoming. Mrs. Serios, who was a nurse at the Institute for Nurses in Denver while I was housekeeper there, had worked one summer at Saratoga, Wyoming. It was she who told me of the pine forests. I had never seen a pine until I had come to Colorado, so the idea of home among the pines fascinated me. At that time, I was hoping to pass the civil service examination with no very definite idea as to what I would do, but just to be improving my time and opportunity. I never went to a public school a day in my life. In my childhood days, there was no such thing in the Indian Territory, part of Oklahoma, where we lived, so I have had to try hard to keep learning. Before the time came for the examination, I was so discouraged because of the grip that nothing but the mountains, the pines, and the clean, fresh air seemed worth while. So it all came about just as I have written you. So you see, I was very deceitful. Do you remember? I wrote you of a little baby boy dying. That was my own little Jamie, our first little son. For a long time my heart was crushed. He was such a sweet, beautiful boy. I wanted him so much. He died of erysipelas. I held him in my arms till the last agony was over. Then I dressed the beautiful little body for the grave. Clyde is a carpenter, so I wanted him to make the little coffin. He did it, every bit, and I lined and padded it, trimmed and covered it. Not that we couldn't afford to buy one, or that our neighbors were not all that was kind and willing, but because it was a sad pleasure to do everything for our little firstborn ourselves. As there had been no physician to help, so there was no minister to comfort, and I could not bear to let our baby leave the world without leaving any message to a community that sadly needed it. His little message to us had been love, so I selected a chapter from John, and we had a funeral service at which all our neighbors for 30 miles round were present. So you see, our union is sealed by love and welded by a great sorrow. Little Jamie was the first little Stuart. God has given me 2 more precious little sons. The old sorrow is not so keen now. I can bear to tell you about it, but I never could before. When you think of me, you must think of me as one who is truly happy. It is true I want a great many things I haven't got, but I don't want them enough to be discontented and not enjoy the many blessings that are mine. I have my home among the Blue Mountains, my healthy, well-formed children, my clean, honest husband, my kind, gentle milk cows, my garden, which I make myself. I have loads and loads of flowers, which I tend myself. There are lots of chicken, turkeys, and pigs, which are my own special care. I have some slow, old, gentle horses and an old wagon. I can load up the kiddies and go where I please any time. I have the best, kindest neighbors, and I have my dear absent friends. Do you wonder I am so happy? When I think of it all, I wonder how I can crowd all my joy into one short life. I don't want you to think for one moment that you are bothering me when I write you. It is a real pleasure to do so. You're always so good to let me tell you everything. I'm only afraid of trying your patience too far. Even in this long letter, I can't tell you all I want to, so I shall write you again soon. Jerrine will write too. Just now she was very sore in her fingers. She has been picking gooseberries, and they have been pretty severe on her brown little paws. With much love to you, I am honest and truly yours, Eleanor Rupert Stewart. Chapter 18. The Adventure of the Christmas Tree. January 6, 1913. My dear friend, I have put off writing you and thanking you for your thought for us until now, so that I could tell you of our very happy Christmas and our dear hunt all at once. To begin with, Mr. Stewart and Junior have gone to Boulder to spend the winter. Clyde wanted his mother to have a chance to enjoy our boy, so as he had to go, he took Junior with him. Then those of my dear neighbors nearest my heart decided to prevent a lonely Christmas for me, So on December 21st came Mrs. Louderer, laden with an immense plum pudding and a big wurst. And a little later came Mrs. O'Shaughnessy on her frisky pony. Chief, her scarlet sweater came a bright bit of color against our snow-wrapped horizon. Her face and ways are just as bright and cheery as can be. When she saw Mrs. Louderer's pudding and sausage, she said she had brought nothing because she had come to get something to eat herself. And she continued, "It is a private opinion of mine that my neighbors are so glad to see me that they are glad to feed me." Now, wouldn't that little speech have made her welcome anywhere? Well, we were hilariously planning what Mrs. O'Shaughnessy called a witty Christmas and getting supper when a great stamping off of snow proclaimed a newcomer. It was Gavitt, and we were powerfully glad to see him because the hired man was going to a dance, and we knew Gavitt would contrive some unusual amusement. He had heard that Clyde was going to have a deer drive and didn't know that he had gone, so he had come down to join the hunt just for the fun, and was very much disappointed to find there was going to be no hunt. After supper, before his good humor returned, and he told us story after story of big hunts he had had in Canada, he worked up his own enthusiasm as well as ours, and at last proposed that we have a drive of our own for a Christmas joy. He said he would take a station and do the shooting if one of us would do the driving. So right now, I reckon I had better tell you how it is done. There are many little parks in the mountains where the deer can feed, although now most places are so deep in snow that they can't walk in it. For that reason, they have trails to water and to the different feeding grounds, and they can't get through the snow except along these paths. You see how easy it would be for a man hidden on the trail to get one of the beautiful creatures if someone coming from another direction startled them so that they came along that particular path. So they made their plans. Mrs. O'Shaughnessy elected herself driver 2 miles away in a huge mountain called Philippeco, and deer were said to be plentiful up there. At one time there had been a sawmill on the mountain, and there were a number of deserted cabins in which we could make ourselves comfortable. So it was planned that we go up the next morning, stay all night, have the hunt the following morning, and then come home with our game. Well, we were all astir early the next morning, and soon grain, bedding, and chuck box were in the wagon. Then Mrs. Louderer, the kinder, and myself piled in. Mrs. O'Shaughnessy bestrode Chief. Gavitt stalked on ahead to pick our way, and we were off. It was a long, tedious climb, and I wished over and over that I had stayed at home. But it was altogether on baby's account. I was so afraid that he would suffer, but he kept warm as toast. The day was beautiful, and the views many times repaid us for any hardship we had suffered. It was 3 o'clock before we reached the old mill camp. Soon we had a roaring fire, and Gavitt made the horses comfortable in one of the cabins. They were bedded in soft, dry sawdust, and were quite as well off as if they had been in their own stalls. Then some rough planks were laid on blocks, and we had our first meal since breakfast. We called it supper, and we had potatoes roasted in embers. Mrs. Louderer's wurst, which she had been calmly carrying around on her arm like a hoop, and which was delicious with the bread that Gavitt toasted on long sticks. We had steaming coffee, and we were all happy. Even Baby clapped his hands and crowed at the unusual sight of the open fire. After supper, Gavitt took a little stroll and returned with a couple of grouse for our breakfast. After dark, we sat round the fire eating peanuts and listening to Gavitt and Mrs. Louderer telling stories of their different great forests. But soon Gavitt took his big sleeping bag and retired to another cabin, warning us that we must be up early. Our impoverished beds were the most comfortable things. I loved the flicker of the open fire and the smell of the pines, the pure, sweet air, and I went to sleep thinking how blessed I was to be able to enjoy things I love most. It seemed only a short time until someone knocked on our door, and we were all wide awake in a minute. The fire had burned down, and only a soft, indistinct glow from the embers lighted the room, while through a hole in the roof I could see a star glimmering frostily. It was Gavitt at the door, and he called through a crack, saying he had been hearing odd noises for an hour, and he was going to investigate. He had called us so that we need not be alarmed should we hear the noise and not find him. We scrambled into our clothes quickly and ran outdoors to listen. I can never describe to you the weird beauty of moonlight nights among the pines, when the snow is sparkling and gleaming, the deep silence unbroken even by the snapping of a twig. We stood shivering and straining our ears, and were about to go back to bed when we heard faintly a long-drawn wail, as if all the suffering and sorrow on the earth was bound up in that one sound. We couldn't tell which way it came from, and it seemed to vibrate through the air and chill our hearts. I had heard that the panthers cried that way, but Gavitt said it was not a panther. He said the engine and saws had been moved from where we were to another spring across the canyon a mile away, where timber for sawing was more plentiful. But he supposed every one had left the mill when the water froze, so they couldn't saw. He added that someone must have remained and was perhaps in need of help. If we were not afraid, he would leave us and go see what was wrong. We went in, made up the fire, and sat in silence, wondering what we should see or hear next. Once or twice that agonizing cry came shivering through the cold moonlight. After an age, we heard Gavitt crunching through the snow, whistling cheerily to reassure us. He had crossed the canyon to the new mill camp, where he had found 2 women, loggers' wives, and some children. One of the women was soon to give birth, she who was wailing so, and it was the kind of a way where we could be of great help and comfort. Mrs. Louderer stayed and took care of the children, while Mrs. O'Shanassy and I followed after Gavitt, panting and stumbling through the snow. Gavitt said he suspected they were short of needfuls, so he had filled his pockets with coffee, sugar, and took in the bottle some of the milk I brought for baby, and his own flask of whiskey, without which he never travels. At last, after what seemed to me hours of scrambling through the snow, through deep gloom where pines were thickest, and out again into patches of white moonlight, we reached the ugly clearing where the new camp stood. Gavitt escorted us to the door and then returned to our camp. Entering, we saw the poor little soon-to-be mother huddled on her poor bed, while the older woman stood near, warning her that the oil would soon be all gone and they would be in darkness. She told us that the sick one had been in pain all day before and much of the night, and that she herself was worn completely out. So Mrs. O'Shanassy sent her to bed, and we took charge. Secretly, I felt it all to be a big nuisance to be dragged out of my own warm, comfortable bed to trape through the snow at this time of night. But the moment the poor little Molly spoke, I was glad I was living, because she was a poor little Southern girl whose husband is a Mormon. He had been sent on a mission to Alabama, and the poor girl had fallen in love with his handsome face and knew nothing of Mormonism, so she had run away with him. She thought it would be so grand to live in the glorious West with so splendid a man as she believed her husband to be, but now she believed she was going to die, and she was glad of it because she could not return to her folks, and she said she knew her husband was dead because he and the other woman's husband, both of whom had intended to stay there all winter and cut logs, had gone 2 weeks before to get their summer's wages and buy supplies. Neither man had come back, and there was not a horse or any other way to get out of the mountains to hunt them. So they believed the men to be frozen somewhere on the road. Rather a dismal prospect, wasn't it? Molly was just longing for some little familiar thing, so I was glad I have not yet forgotten to rid myself of my Southern talk. No Westerner can ever understand a Southerner's need of sympathy, and however kind their hearts, they are unable to give it. Only a Southerner can understand how dear are our peculiar words and phrases. The poor little Molly took new courage when she found I knew what she meant when she said she was just honin' after a friendly voice. Well, as soon as we had hot water and had filled some bottles and placed them around our patient, and after a couple of hours the tiny little stranger came into the world, it had been necessary to have a great fire in order to have light. So as soon as we got baby dressed, I opened the door a little to cool the room, and Molly saw the morning star twinkling merrily. "Oh," she said, "that is what I will call my little girlie. Star, dear little star." It is strange, isn't it, how our spirits will revive after some great ordeal. Molly had been sure she was going to die and saw nothing to live for. Now that she had had a cup of hot milk and held her red little baby close, she was just as happy and hopeful as if she had never left her best friend home to follow the uncertain fortunes of young Will Crosby. So she and I talked of ash hoppers, smokehouses, cotton patches, goobers, poke greens, and shoats until she fell asleep. Soon day was abroad, and so we went outdoors for a fresh breath. The other woman came out just then to ask after Molly. She invited us into her cabin, and oh, the little Mormons were everywhere, poor half-clad little things. Some sourdough biscuits and a can of condensed milk was everything they had to eat. The mother explained to us that their man had gone to get things for them, but had not come back, so she guessed they had got drunk and were likely in jail. She told it in a very unconcerned manner. Poor thing. Years of such experience had taught her that blessed are they who expect nothing, for they shall not be disappointed. She said that if Molly had not been so sick, she would have walked down out of the mountains and got help. Just then 2 shots rang out in quick succession, and soon Gavitt came staggering along with a deer across his shoulders that he left for the family. From our camp he had brought some bacon and butter for Molly, and poor though it may seem, it was a treat for her. Leaving the woman to dress the venison with her eldest boy's aid, we put out across the canyon for our own breakfast. Beside our much-beaten trail hung the second venison, and when we reached our camp and had our own delicious breakfast of grouse, bread, butter, and coffee, Gavitt took Chub and went for our venison. In a short time we were rolling homeward. Of course, it didn't take us nearly so long to get home because it was downhill and the road was clearly marked. So in a couple of hours we were home. Gavitt knew the 2 loggers were in Green River and were then at work storing ice for the railroad, but he had not known that their wives were left as they were. The men actually had got drunk, lost their money, and were then trying to replace it. After we debated a bit, we decided we could not enjoy Christmas with those people in want up there in the cold. Then we got busy. It is 60 miles to town, although our nearest point to the railroad is but 40. So you see it was impossible to get to town to get anything. You should have seen us. Every old garment that had ever been left by men who have worked here was hauled out, and Mrs. O'Shaughnessy's deft fingers soon had a pile of garments cut. We kept the machine humming until far into the night, as long as we could keep our eyes open. All next day we sewed as hard as we could, and Gabbett cooked as hard as he could. We had intended to have a tree for Jerrine, so we had a box of candles and a box of Christmas snow. Gabbett asked for all the bright paper we could find. We had lots of it, and I think you would be surprised at the possibilities of a little waste paper. He made gorgeous birds, butterflies, and flowers out of paper that once wrapped parcels. Then he asked us for some silk thread, but I had none. So he told us to comb our hair and give him the combings. We did, and with a drop of mucilage, he would fasten a hair to a bird's back, and then hold it up by the hair. At a few feet's distance, it looked exactly as though the bird were flying. It was glad I had a big stone jar full of fondant, because we had a lot of fun shaping and coloring candies. We offered a prize for the best representation of a person, and we had 24 chocolate-covered things that might have been anything from a monkey to a mouse. Mrs. Louderer cut up her big plum pudding and put it into a dozen little bags. These Gabbett carefully covered with green paper. Then we tore up the holly wreath that Aunt Mary sent me, and put a sprig in the top of each green bag of pudding. I never had so much fun in my life as I had preparing for that Christmas. At 10 o'clock, the morning of the 24th, we were again on our way up the mountainside. We took shovels so we could clear a road if need be. We had dinner at the old camp, and then Gabbett hunted us a way out into the new, and we smuggled our things into Molly's cabin so the children would have a real surprise. Poor hopeless little things. Theirs was indeed a dull outlook. Gabbett busied himself in preparing one of the empty cabins for us and in making the horses comfortable. He cut some pine boughs to do that with, and so they paid no attention when he cut a small tree. In the meantime, we had cleared everything from Molly's cabin but her bed. We wanted her to see the fun. The children were sent to the spring to water the horses, and they were all allowed to ride. So that took them out of the way while Gabbett nailed the tree into a box he had filled with dirt to hold it steady. There were 4 women of us and Gabbett, so it was only the work of a few moments to get the tree ready, and it was the most beautiful one I ever saw. Your largest bell, dear Mrs. Coney, dangled from the topmost branch. Gabbett had attached a long stout wire to your Santa Claus, so he was able to make him dance frantically without seeming to do so. The hairs that held the birds and the butterflies could not be seen, and the effect was beautiful. We had a bucket of apples rubbed bright, and these were fastened to the tree just as they grew on their own branches. The puddings looked pretty too, and we had done up the parcels that held the clothes as attractively as we could. We saved the candy and the peanuts to put in their little stockings. As soon as it was dark, we lighted the candles, and then their mother called the children. Oh, if you could have seen them! It was the very first Christmas tree they had ever seen, and they didn't know what to do. The very first present Gabbett handed out was a pair of trousers for the 8-year-old Brig. But he just stood and stared at the tree until his brother, next in size, with an eye to the main chance, got behind him and pushed him forward all the time, exclaiming, "Go on, can't you? They ain't doing nothing to you. They're just doing something for you." Still Brig would not put out his hand. He just shook his tousled sandy head and said he wanted a bird. So the fun kept up for an hour. Santa had for Molly a package of oatmeal, a pound of butter, a mason jar of cream, and a dozen eggs. so that she could have suitable food to eat until something could be done. After the presents had all been distributed, we put the phonograph on a box and had a dandy concert. We played There Were Shepherds, Ave Maria, Sweet Christmas Bells. Only we old people cared for those, so that we had Arawana, Silver Bells, and Rainbow, Red Wing, and such songs. How delighted they were! Our concert lasted 2 hours, and by that time the little fellers were so sleepy that the excitement no longer affected them, and they were put to bed. But they hung up their stockings first, and even Molly hung hers up too. We filled them with peanuts and candy, putting the lion's share of the people into Molly's stocking. Next morning, the happiness broke out in the new spots. The children were all clean and warm, though I am afraid I can't brag on the fit of all the clothes. But the pride of the wearers did away with the necessity of a fit. The mother was radiantly thankful for the warm petticoat, that it was made of a blanket, too small for a bed didn't bother her, and the stripes were around the bottom anyway. Molly openly rejoiced in her new gown, and that it was made of ugly gray outing flannel she didn't know nor care. Baby Star Crosby looked perfectly sweet in her little new clothes, and her little gown had blue sleeves, and they thought a white skirt only added to its beauty. And so it was about everything. We all got so much out of so little. I will never again allow even the smallest thing to go to waste. We were every one just as happy as we could be, almost as delighted as Molly was over her little people we made. There were very little given that had not been thrown away or was not just odds and ends. There were never anything more true than that it was more blessed to give than to receive. We certainly had a delicious dinner, too, and we let Molly have all she wanted that we dared allow her to eat. The roast venison was so good that we were tempted to let her taste it, but we thought better of that. As soon as dinner was over, we packed our belongings and betook ourselves homeward. It was just dusk when we reached home. Away off in a bare hill, a wolf barked. A big howl hooted lonesomely among the pines, and soon a pack of yelping coyotes went scrambling across the frozen waste. It was not the Christmas I had in mind when I sent the card, but it was a dandy one just the same, with best wishes to you for a happy New Year. Sincerely your friend, Eleanor Rupert Stewart. And we will continue this story next Wednesday. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.